In this lesson, we're going to use the Ant build tool in order to deploy the predictions web service. So you're looking at the working file called ant.txt. I've got the URL for the Ant tool on the second line. If you open a browser and just search for Apache Ant, you'll get a hit. There are various ways to install it, pretty straightforward. For example, I'm on a Mac. I used Mac ports to install. There's a Windows installer. There are installers for Linux and so on. For the particular Ant script that I'm going to provide, version 1.6 or higher is what's needed. The current version is 1.9. Once you've installed Ant, the way to check that it is properly installed is to open up a command line prompt and type ant-version. Now let me give a very quick summary of how Ant works, and then we'll use it. When you type ant at the command line, it looks for a file called build.xml, which basically is a list of tasks that you want Ant to perform. So for example, you might want Ant to compile some files. You might want Ant to place certain files in certain directories. In our case, we're going to ask Ant to do all of that and then to build a jar file with a .war extension, W-A-R, web archive. So the easy way to deploy to Tomcat, or to Jetty for that matter, is to put the web service or the website in a WAR file and drop it into the web apps directory under Tomcat. In my particular case, if you come down here, the relevant command is ant-d. That capital D basically means I'm providing a command line argument. That argument is the name of the WAR file. So to take a simple example, if I give the name as hi, it's going to build hi.war and then deploy that file. So what I'd like to do now is switch from the Emacs editor to the command line so I can show you how this works. So first, let me show you Tomcat web apps. And as you can see right now, there's no WAR file in that directory. So what I'm going to do is move up. I've built a directory called test. Let me show you it. In test at the top level is build.xml. And at the same level, there's a subdirectory called src. That name is very important to me. If you now look at src, you'll see that in there, you have a subdirectory called predictions. We'll look at that in just a second. You've got my so-called database file, predictions.db. That's just a text file with all the predictions in it. There's my JSP script, and there's what Tomcat calls the deployment descriptor, web.xml. That's a configuration document. We'll look at the details later. Right now, I want to show you the predictions subdirectory under source. And in there, you can see I've got my prediction.java and predictions.java. Those are the two Java beans that support the JSP script. Now, what I'm going to do, this is our context. I'm going to type ant -d war name equals predictions. Any name would do, space, deploy. Cross your fingers, hope for the best. This went pretty quickly, and it tells me what it did. It did a clean, a prepare. Those details we'll worry about later. A compile, a deploy. The important thing is basically for us this last message. So it's told me that it has copied the built WAR file to the web apps directory. So let me clear the screen to make it a little more visible. And what I'm now going to do is confirm that the thing is deployed. Home, Tomcat 8, web apps. And what you'll notice is way over here to the right, you see predictions.war. What Tomcat has done is unwarred the file. Some people describe this as unpacking the WAR file. Basically, it's built a subdirectory called predictions, and it has unpacked the contents of the WAR file into predictions. Now let me show you what's in that WAR file. So I'm going to use the jar utility, standard with Java, tvf, T for table of contents, predictions.war. And what you can see is that the Ant has done quite a bit. For example, this line, it has compiled the prediction.class file. It has compiled the predictions file. It has put the configuration file web.xml in the appropriate place. It has put my so-called database file under a subdirectory called data. Some of these placements are optional, some are mandatory. For example, the rules are basically this in Tomcat. If you have a .class file, it must occur someplace under webinf classes. In our case, it's webinf classes predictions, that's the package name, prediction.class, and so on. Now, let me clear the screen for readability, and let me go back to this directory where I did the deployment command. Over to the left, there's a build subdirectory. So essentially, what my script does is the following. It copies everything out of source into build, so I don't touch anything in the original source directory. This is for safety purposes. It then does all of the compilation, all of the building, and so forth in that build subdirectory, and then it constructs the war file that I told it to construct, predictions.war. It copies that over to web apps in Tomcat. If Tomcat thinks that the file looks reasonable, it will unwar it. In other words, it will create the subdirectory, in this case called predictions. So we can actually go back and look at that once again. So this is the result of unwarring. If you see that, it's reasonably good news. It means that Tomcat hasn't found any obvious problems and we're probably good to go. If you don't see that file, you know we've got a problem, and now we're into the logs subdirectory because we're going to look at the logging information. In future lessons, I'll go into more detail about how this deployment file works, but I do want to show you one last thing. So what I want to do is show you build.xml and just give you a heads up on what you need to change on your system. So I've got a very long comment at the top, which is basically a tutorial. It repeats many of the points that I've just made. But this is the critical line here. The very first part of my build.xml file specifies where you've installed Tomcat on your machine. So in my case, on this machine, it's users, Martin Kalin, Tomcat 8. You would put in whatever directory you installed. And if you're using Windows, by the way, you can use the forward slashes. You don't need to use the backward slashes. Okay, in summary, this is our first look at the Ant utility, how it facilitates the building of web services that we then deploy, in this case, to Tomcat. By the way, the same Ant is easily adapted to work with Jetty and other Java-based web servers.